Now that we know all of those resources, let's talk about the steps for target validation. There's a much lengthier version of these steps in the target validation protocol that also includes all the things that SBTI does in this process, but we really wanted to focus on what the steps you would be taking to set your target. And so this is that simpler version here. First, you need to fill out a target validation survey on the SBTI services website. This is quite a lengthy process, but most questions are pretty straightforward. It's definitely helpful for companies to take a few weeks to fill out the validation survey, review it, get it checked by some of your internal stakeholders to make sure that it's aligned with what your business agrees on and is ready to be submitted. Once you have that validation survey completed, the next step is to submit the form using their online booking system and submit all of that information into the portal. This is when you'll need to accept the terms and conditions and pay the fee for target validation. And this kind of puts you into the queue for target validation. Between step 2 and 3, there will be a little bit of a wait before your validation process begins. And then after SBTI has your forms and reviews them, you need to be prepared to answer questions during that review process for SBTI to clarify any of the information that you've provided. SBTI has a general expectation that you answer those questions within 2 days of receiving them. And so if you're very responsive and meet those 2-day deadlines, you can expect that the validation process and review process should take about 30 days. One thing to note on deadlines here is if you want your target to count for your CDP scoring, you need to submit your targets by mid-May to ensure that your target can be validated before you're trying to submit those CDP responses. This is because there's a 1 to 2 month backlog on reserving a slot to review your target. Over the past couple of years, we've seen that queue be up to 5 or 6 months, but since SBTI has updated their validation processes, we've seen them cut that time down by quite a bit. The final step here is to receive the SBTI decision on your target. And if your target is approved, that's a huge accomplishment. And you should absolutely celebrate that both internally and externally. If your target is not approved, that's definitely not the end of the world because the fee that you pay for this validation process allows you to submit a target one more time for review, under which in that case, you would get some guidance from SBTI about what you need to take back to the drawing board and improve on to resubmit your target for validation. We now have a little bit more information on the form that you'll need to submit and what you'll need to prepare for your SBTI submission process. We have on the left-hand side here a summary of what information you need to collect, which includes things like your completed target submission form, any CDP reports that you have. If you submit a CDP climate change questionnaire each year, you should have that prepared to submit to SBTI. SBTI really uses that CDP questionnaire to check your footprint against the numbers that you provide in your CDP response to make sure that that aligns and that the target validation aligns with other pieces of information that you're publicly disclosing. You'll also need to provide a copy of the SBTI tool, which you've seen through this course, and that allows them to make sure that the targets you're setting align with the results of the tool that they build and recommend that you use. If you, instead of using the science-based targets tool, created your own calculation models to build out the targets, this makes it harder for SBTI to validate. And so we would definitely recommend using that target setting tool and submitting it. Another thing to note about SBTI is if they don't ask for something, then there's no need for you to provide it. For example, your completed greenhouse gas inventory footprint in Excel, an annual report, things like that. You don't necessarily need to submit them because they can overcomplicate the process and make validation take longer than it would need to otherwise. On the right-hand side, you can see some things that SBTI will be looking for and evaluating for your target, which really focuses on both your inventory and the targets that you've developed. And we want to make sure that your greenhouse gas inventory is aligned with the numbers that you put in your target, as well as any other public documents. If that's not the case, you need to be prepared to add comments to explain why that's so. On the next slide, you can see a little bit more detail about the SBTI validation portal and the sections that are included in it. So there are 4 key sections of the SBTI validation portal, and you'll likely need your footprint and the analysis results of your targets to fill out these sections. There's really 3 administrative sections and then 1 main content section. The 3 administrative sections are validation services, payment, and terms and conditions, which will ask for general information, and you'll have to accept some general terms and be prepared to submit that payment. The bulk of the content and most of the work that you'll be putting together for the validation process will go into the submission elements section. That's number 2, which is made up of 4 subsections. Each of these focus on a different topic area and will have additional subtopics depending on the information that you fill out in these tabs. The greenhouse gas inventory will generally ask about your emissions calculations, your methodology, your emissions per category. For the targets, that's when you'll use that SBTI target setting tool to fill out the targets that you're proposing. You'll have to provide a little bit of details around progress and reporting, which will ask about your target development and plans once you set those targets. And then the last section is the evaluation questions, which are kind of tailored based on the information that you provide in the 3 sections before that, and may ask about certain pieces of information that you submit in the other submission elements. And this is really new this year and is likely a result of SBTI trying to cut back on the number of questions they ask you during the validation process. So make sure that when you're providing responses to the evaluation questions, you provide thorough responses, because that can help expedite your validation process and help SBTI completely understand your greenhouse gas inventory and the targets you would like to set. With that, I'll pass it back to Ryan to talk you through committing to seeking validation.
Okay, thank you, Isabel. So as Isabel mentioned, we'll next be covering how to commit to SBTI and seek that validation. So this first slide here shows the process if you decide to pursue full SBTI target validation. It usually starts with calculating your emissions footprint. That's going to be your baseline. From there, you gather the data that you need and review the SBTI criteria so you can model different target options, which has been the focus of this track. Once targets are then developed, the next step is to get internal approval and then proceed with submitting to SBTI. Filling out the forms and collecting supporting documents can take a few weeks, as Isabel noted, so make sure that you account for that in your timeline. After that, SBTI runs its validation process, which typically takes 4 to 5 months from submission to approval all the way through. And then finally, once your targets are validated, you communicate them publicly and then report progress against them each year. So while it might look like a really long journey, it's really just a series of steps, each one building on the one before. Once you sign a commitment letter with SBTI, you'll have 24 months to develop and submit your targets for validation across scopes 1, 2, and 3. The process itself is pretty simple. It's just a short letter you fill out and submit through the SBTI services platform. For most companies, that's enough to show stakeholders that you're serious about climate action, while you also have time to prepare the data and analysis you need for full target validation. There are also some benefits. For example, if you commit to a net zero target, your company can qualify for the Race to Zero campaign, which provides a reputational boost. But it's also important to note that if a company doesn't follow through within the 24-month window, they're marked as quote unquote removed on the SBTI's public dashboard. So there is accountability tied to the commitment as well. For SMEs, or small to medium-sized enterprises, SBTI offers a streamlined route. This route lets smaller companies skip the first step of just committing and instead go directly to setting near-term targets for scope 1 and 2 emissions, and optionally scope 3 and net zero as well. It makes the process much quicker for these smaller companies. So whether you are a large company or an SME, the commitment letter is a straightforward first step, but it also comes with a clock and some clear expectations to follow through on. So next, let's cover some more on target setting for those small and medium-sized enterprises, or again, SMEs as we'll call them. One quick update I want to flag is that SBTI recently updated its definition of what counts as a small or medium enterprise. This change took effect in January 2024, so still relatively recent. And it means some companies that used to qualify as SMEs now need to follow the full corporate validation route instead. So here's how it works. So to qualify as an SME, you first need to meet all the criteria in that top blue row on the slide here. So this includes things like being under 10,000 tons of emissions, and not falling into certain sectors like financial institutions or oil and gas. Then you also need to meet three out of the four criteria in that bottom orange row. Uh, these are things like having fewer than 250 employees, turnover under 50 million euro, or total assets under 25 million euros. If you meet those requirements, then you can still use the SME route. If not, you'll need to use the standard corporate process, which comes with broader requirements. Keep in mind, terms like turnover and total assets are, of course, finance terms. So it is a good idea to check with your finance or audit teams if you're unsure if you meet some of these criteria. Also, feel free to utilize the resources we've provided here on the slide if you're unsure as well. So as an SME, you have three main options for setting targets under SBTI. The first is near-term targets. These are the most common and most relevant for our program. They cover absolute scope 1 and 2 emission reductions by 2030, and scope 3 isn't required. For most suppliers, this is the natural starting point, and this will be the focus of the Locked for Healthcare program, as we've noted here on the slide. The second option is near-term maintenance targets. These are for companies that have already gotten their scope 1 or 2 emissions down to zero and want to make sure that they stay there through 2030. It's a bit less common, but we sometimes hear from suppliers who are already very low on emissions, and this option is designed for them specifically. And finally, there are net zero targets. These are the most ambitious of the targets. So to be eligible, a company has to already have a near-term target in place. And then also, a company needs to commit to reaching net zero across 1, 2, and 3, scopes 1, 2, and 3, by 2050, including neutralizing any emissions that can't be eliminated. These net zero targets will likely become more and more relevant as expectations continue to grow over time. And this slide here is meant to serve as a resource page and toolkit laying out the 5 steps SMEs go through to set and approve a target with SBTI. Step 1 is filling out the SME target setting form online. So that'll include your company details, your chosen target, and agreeing to the terms and conditions laid forth by SBTI. Step 2 is due diligence. So SBTI will review your submission to make sure everything is complete and accurate. Once it passes, you'll get an email confirming your approval to proceed. Step 3 is pretty straightforward, just invoicing and payment, where you will pay SBTI for the fees for setting your target. Step 4 is then verification, where SBTI confirms payment and sends you a communications pack to help with the public announcements. And then finally, step 5 is communications. Your approved target is published on the SBTI website and also shared on the We Mean Business site. That way, stakeholders can see your commitment publicly. One other note here, the SME route is typically faster than the full corporate route, and the fees are listed at the bottom of the slide so you can know what to expect as well. So overall, this process is meant to be straightforward, clear, and a little bit lighter than the standard corporate pathway for these smaller companies. So that'll be all for today's recorded portion. Please refer to the learning platform for these slides and any additional references as well. Thanks, guys.